Hello guys, I'm Paul Obatelli and this is edition 13 of the THA podcast, brought to you by Theo Humanist Arts. As usual, it's great to be back, where our goal is to bring you weekly shows and all the best interviews we can get our hands on. Our talks include news, conspiracies, spirituality, the occult, science, history, art, philosophy, religion and much more. If you'd like to get hold of us and send us any ideas for the show, for requests for potential guests, you can do so by emailing info@thapodcast.com. That's info@thapodcast.com. If you're new to the show, you can download our content from www.thapodcast.com, or you can subscribe to our RSS feeds or through iTunes, Stitcher, and if you're on Android, the Beyond Pod app. For more details on that, just go to our website and follow the links. And if you do have any issues, just let us know, because we do want to know about them and we should be able to sort you out. Okay, well today we'll be speaking with Anthony Peake, who is the author of 7 books, including the most recent, The Infinite Mindfield. He is currently in the process of working on a new book, The Immortal Mind, with the highly influential philosopher of science, Professor Ervin Laszlo. Anthony's been very hard at work the past few years, presenting his research on metaphysics, life after death, dreams, the discoveries of the brain being the natural creator of the hallucinogenic substance DMT. I personally really like Anthony's work, so I've been looking forward to this one. But before we go there, it is time for a surge from the dramaturge, Mr. David Parry.
Good afternoon, Mr. Obatelli. How is your good self?
David?
Hello?
David?
Can't you hear me?
Yes, I can. I just wanted our listeners to have a bit of a test to see what you'd be like in an awkward situation.
I'm always in an awkward situation. That's life in theatre, love.
Well, yeah, that's true. I'd say you handled it okay. I think you were a bit suspicious then. You weren't quite convinced.
I don't trust technology, my dear. It's not you. I don't trust technology.
Okay.
I am mindful of Hamlet, Act 1, Scene 5 today.
Oh, is that where you've been, is it?
No, I'm not going to discuss where I've been, because I will start swearing and using demotic Anglo-Saxon.
Oh, sorry. Be good listening.
Would be good listening. I do it on stage sometimes. I am minded that there is a line. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy, because I think today's speaker sums all that up.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, it's I have a feeling this is going to be a long one.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's such a prolific writer. I get the impression he's going to be a good talker, and I think he's a fun guy to have on.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to this a lot.
Yeah, well, I am too, so let's not waste any more time. Let's get to it. Hi, Anthony. Welcome to the show.
Great to be involved.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. I am a fan of your work. I've been following you for a while, so that's why I was very excited to get you on. Maybe we could get started with a little bit of a synopsis of your latest book, The Infinite Mindfield.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I was particularly excited about this book because it pulls together effectively 10 years' work in that all my books, all my previous books are iterative in the sense that they develop ideas, and as new ideas come up and I come across different hypotheses and read different academic papers, my ideas adapt. And this book is a much wider approach that I've ever taken before, but in simple terms, it's presenting evidence that the pineal gland is a portal into alternate realities. And again, that sounds like an incredibly outrageous statement to make, but effectively I do, as most of my readers will know, I do the science. So there's nothing I say in the book that is not based upon concrete, powerful, and very, very convincing neurological evidence, neurophysical evidence, and neurochemical evidence of the fact that the pineal gland is some form of portal. What I do is I take the reader throughout the book, I take the reader right back into history. So I go right back to ancient Sumer, and I discuss the beliefs that light is of profound importance, and also that the pineal gland itself is of ultimate importance. I then carry that through right across the Silk Road to the Tao of China, then up to the Tibetan Plateau, then back to Egypt, and then carry on through into various other belief systems throughout the centuries, including the Masons, the Theosophists, and various other groups, whilst all the time actually keeping very much in tune with the science, because effectively I also bring in something called a zero-point field or zero-point energy, which is the energy found within the quantum vacuum, which we can discuss in greater detail. I'm also working closely with Professor Ervin Laszlo, who has been nominated for the Nobel Prize twice. In fact, I met Ervin 2 weekends ago in Milan, where we were both involved in a symposium at the University of Milan. And we had various scientists, neurologists, psychologists, psychiatrists, quantum physicists, all involved in a 2-day symposium discussing the viability of this quantum vacuum energy field that we're talking about. We actually had somebody who came down from CERN to be involved in this event. So this was a very, very big, very important event for all of us, I think.
Okay, just on a technical level, can you just speak a little bit further back from the mic, because we're getting a bit of a pop from you every now and then. Yeah, just a little bit. Yes, yeah, that's a bit better. Yeah, it wasn't too bad, but I just thought I'd let you know. Yep. Well, yeah, it sounds really interesting. One of the things, I mean, monitoring your work for quite a while, and obviously I noticed that a lot of this stuff isn't in the mainstream, and you know, it's kind of dusted under the mat. People like yourself are often criticised for going into a lot of this sort of stuff. Why do you think that is, and do you feel it's changing now? Because obviously there just seems, I've noticed a little bit more of it in the mainstream at the moment. What are your views on that?
Well, I think it is in the mainstream. I don't think that necessarily the mainstream is denying it. What I'm saying, what I genuinely believe, is that it is generally believed that the vast majority of humanity are not ready for this kind of information. For example, it has been known since the 1920s about certain effects known within quantum physics that are not taught even at A-level physics level, even today, because they feel that this kind of information can only be taught at undergraduate and postgraduate level. The same goes for the neurology. I mean, for instance, a classic example of this is that one of the most important experiments that have taken place in the last 50, 60 years took place in 1981 in Paris, where a guy called Alain Aspect proved something called Bell's inequality, which is effectively that subatomic particles communicate instantaneously over any distance. Now, this experiment, known as the Paris experiment, should have been world news. It should have been in headlines everywhere, because effectively it suggests that everything is entangled with everything else. Therefore, we could explain things like ESP, we could explain precognition, various other things. But this has never gone into the mainstream. Now, on top of this, people have been working in advance of this, and there's a guy called Anton Zeilinger, who's at the University of Vienna, who has been working with entangled particles now for 20 years. He's actually been sending entangled particles between 2 islands in the Canary Islands in Spain. A few years ago, he's also sent entangled particles along the Great Wall of China. Again, these experiments are happening as we speak, but they're just not in the mainstream. And it is clearly because this does not fit in with the everyday science of the man in the street, the man on the Clapham omnibus. It's too dangerous. It's not safe science anymore. Most people are stuck in the science of 110 years ago, the science before the quantum revolution of 1900, when Max Planck wrote his paper about the quantization of energy. Everybody still believes implicitly that the total explanation of everything that there is physically within the universe is Newtonian in principle. You know, effectively that things cannot communicate at a distance, that how motion works and everything else. These are all things that do work at the macro level. You know, they do work within the world we exist within. But as soon as we get into subatomic particles, then everything changes. And these are the things that build everything, build us, in effect. So clearly, if we are to have a science that can explain everything, which the present scientists in a great state of hubris actually believe that they can, we need to explain, for instance, things like how consciousness spontaneously appears inside the brain. You know, effectively, these are mysteries that cannot even begin to be explained within our present model of science. So we have to come up with something revolutionary and something very, very different. So I think it's not a matter of the mass media ignoring the things. And I do get rather frustrated sometimes because I genuinely believe I'm joining the dots. And I think that my work, and it sounds vain, it's not meant to be, and people who know me know that this is not the case, my work is incredibly important. You know, I really am joining some profound dots, and I'm doing it scientifically. And I think this is why a lot of people are frightened of my work, because I'm not a new ager. I don't make huge claims. I don't claim I'm channeling information from the planet Tharg. I'm not in communication with 7,000-year-old Atlantean princes. I'm actually doing the science. And because I'm doing the science, they're scared of me.
Yeah, I find, I mean, with this stuff, the subject's very complex and difficult to understand, but I do find, being complimentary to you here, I do find that you're very, very good at explaining it and making it sound a little bit more simple than it is. So I think that's quite important to get through to people. So well done on that. So when you mentioned the quantum vacuum, could you tell us a little bit more about that? Because that sounds really interesting.
Yeah, the quantum vacuum is also known as zero-point energy. In effect, it is something, I mean, I could go into great detail on this, but it is a direct result of something called Heisenberg's uncertainty principle. And effectively what this means that you can either know the speed of a particle or its location, subatomic particles. You cannot know both. Now, effectively, what this means, I mean, scientifically, this is a fact, Heisenberg uncertainty principle, it's known for subatomic particles. However, the mystery is that at absolute zero, 273.15 degrees Kelvin, there is no energy. That is the coldest you can possibly be. Okay, I mean, I think space itself, I think, is around about 3 degrees Kelvin, something of that range. So even space is not at absolute zero. But the fascinating thing is that at absolute zero, there is no energy, which means that subatomic particles effectively stop moving. So in which case you're in a principle whereby you can know the location of an object, and to an extent, probably if they've stopped moving, you can't know their speed, but effectively it contravenes this. Now, there have been experiments done where they've actually taken subatomic particles and taken them down to a fraction, a billionth above absolute zero. And there shouldn't be any energy there, but there is. The particles are picking up energy from somewhere. And the belief is that the particles are picking up energy from something called the quantum vacuum. This is the energy that fills everything. It's the energy that fills everything we perceive. It's an energy field, and it's everywhere. Now, the ancient, the Vedas, the ancient writings of the Indian subcontinent, had a concept which they call the Akasha. And the Akasha effectively is the backdrop to everything. It's an informational field in which everything is contained. Everything is an emanation from the Akasha. Now, modern scientists and people like Ervin Laszlo and people like Vlatko Vedrel, who is one of the world's most interesting quantum physicists. He's professor of quantum physics at the University of Singapore, and he's professor of physics also at the University of Cambridge, or one of the professors of physics at Cambridge. And Vedrel and his associates are of genuine belief that everything in the universe, everything we perceive, is actually not physical at all. It's just emanations of information. Information is what everything is made of. Information as an energy form. And it is believed that this zero-point field, this zero-point energy that exists within the quantum vacuum, is in fact the place that all the information is encoded. So effectively, it is, for want of a better term, the software program by which reality is run. So in other words, reality is being run like a huge computer. Now, it's very important to understand when I use the term computer here, I'm not talking about the computer you have on your desk. Effectively, anything that can process information can be considered to be a computer. For instance, various research recently has shown that the processes that take place within plants when they actually convert energy convert sunlight into energy, photosynthesis. There is a belief that photosynthesis actually runs using a form of computing. Now, if this is the case, and this is fairly breaking news, if this is the case, then anything effectively can be a computer. Because the term computer, it does actually mean something that just computes information. So here we have some fascinating information ourselves about the nature of exactly what consciousness is, and whether consciousness is the ground state that brings everything into existence. In other words, because you are conscious and because you are a conscious observer, you effectively bring about the reality around you into existence by the act of observation. Again, this is something that has been known since the 1920s, when a group of scientists based in Copenhagen in Denmark, under the leadership of Niels Bohr, came up with something called the Copenhagen interpretation of quantum physics. Now, again, there'll be scientists out there who'll be saying, oh, where's he going to go with this? They know exactly where I'm going to go with this. It was suggested by one of their associates, Max Born, that effectively any subatomic particle does not exist until it is measured or observed. Before it is measured or observed, it is a statistic. Exists in what's called a statistical wave, the wave function. That is the statistical chance that that object, say for instance you have a container, and inside that container is one electron. Before that electron is observed, it is smeared out in the whole container. The electron doesn't exist as a point particle, it exists as a probability wave which is smeared out throughout the container. It's only when the container is opened and a measurement or a consciousness perceives that electron that it shrinks into a point particle where it is physically located within a location within the box. Now, statistically, there is more chance of it being found in one particular place than another. This is how the statistics work. But there is a small chance that the particle may be actually outside of the box altogether. Now, again, this idea that particles can be located not only at places that are impossible, but in two places at the same time has been known for quantum physicists for many, many years. Now, effectively, this is how the sun works. You look up at the sun at the moment. This is how the sun works. The sun works using these principles when it's converting, I think it's helium into hydrogen into helium, I think is the process. It's one way or the other.
Right.
But effectively, they're doing this process all the time. Now, this means that what reality is far more complex than we can ever begin to imagine. And to believe that what you perceive when you look out of your eyes at the universe and what you see is what is really out there is called naive realism by researchers. They call it naive realism. It is to be phenomenally naive to assume that what you're seeing is what is actually out there, because it isn't. In my latest book, I give an example of this, and it's a term I came across which I think is wonderful, and it's called electromagnetic chauvinism. It's the idea that because the very small part of the electromagnetic spectrum that we perceive as visible light, we believe that is everything. Now, in the book, The Infinite Mindfield, I give an example of just how naive this is. Okay, the electromagnetic spectrum is energy, basically, electromagnetic energy, which is there are four basic forms of energy within the universe. In fact, the universe consists, and this is all the universe consists of, an up quark and a down quark and electrons. That's everything in the universe is made of an up quark and a down quark and electrons. There's only three particles that are in existence at the present moment in time. We can create more of them artificially, but effectively everything that is around that makes up the physical universe are those three particles. And these three particles exist within four different fields of energy. That is the strong force, the weak force, the electromagnetic force, and gravity. And in fact, they've discovered recently that electromagnetic energy and I think it's the weak force are very similar. So they call it the electroweak force. So everything we perceive, all the planets, all the stars, everything, that's all they're made up of. They're made up of an up and down quark and electrons relating to each other within one of the fields. Now, the electromagnetic field, gravity is the most immediate of all the fields because, you know, you can feel gravity around you. You feel the pull of gravity.
Yeah.
But in fact, gravity is by far the weakest field by factors, huge factors. Okay, it's massively weak. The electromagnetic field is the major field by which we see. In other words, if your eyes, the reason that you are seeing anything at all is little carriers of electromagnetic energy, which are called photons. They're little packets of electromagnetic energy, and they always travel at the speed of light, and they have no mass. So here's when things start getting already weird. These things travel at the speed of light, so there's no time for them. Time has stopped, because of course we know from Einstein that time stops at the speed of light. But these photons, and they have zero mass, so they have no physical presence. But these little things carry the electromagnetic energy. Electromagnetic energy hits your eyes, and your brain processes that electromagnetic energy into a visual image. Okay, we can go back onto how that does that, because even that is weird beyond anything that science will ever tell you. It is weird. Okay, but the electromagnetic energy is carried by photons, and it is different photons work at different wavelengths. So there's lots of different wavelengths, and the wavelengths go from effectively X-rays. I think it's X-rays to radio waves, okay? Or maybe gamma rays, I think. I'm not sure. But effectively, the wavelength gets smaller and smaller from one end to the other. Visible light is a tiny part of this huge rainbow, for want of a better word, of electromagnetic energy. Visible light is the visible rainbow that we see, that everything we perceive is. Now, this concept of electromagnetic chauvinism is we naively believe that everything we perceive is effectively just that part of the visible spectrum. Okay? Now, if you did an analogy of if you made the electromagnetic spectrum to be the length of the Mississippi River in America, from when it rises up in a lake in Minnesota down to when it goes out into the Gulf of Mexico. Imagine that whole river is the electromagnetic spectrum. All the banks of that river are the electromagnetic spectrum. All the meanders and everything else, it's all the electromagnetic spectrum. The universe we perceive would be 1 inch long just south of Hannibal, Missouri. That is it. That is what we think the universe is. We look outside and we see the color red, we see the blue sky, and we think the sky really is blue. The sky's not blue. The sky doesn't have color. If you're looking at a red car, the red isn't in the car. All that is happening is the electromagnetic light, the photons, the bit of that has been reflected back off the car into your eyes is just that tiny part of the electromagnetic spectrum that we perceive as being red. In other words, we have this perception that red is a little part of the electromagnetic spectrum. But red doesn't exist out there. It doesn't exist anywhere. Everything is black. You know, everything, if there's no light, everything is black. Now, on top of this, we have creatures that we share this planet with who perceive reality totally differently. A guy called Nagel wrote a paper a few years ago called What It's Like to Be a Bat. Effectively, bats see sound. They actually bounce sound waves off things, and they orientate their universe based upon sound waves. So they perceive the world in a completely different way to us. A bumblebee, when it's flying round flowers, does not see a blue or a red flower. They see different wavelengths. They're perceiving things completely different to the way we perceive them. So we think a flower is red, or it's blue, or leaves are green. This is not the case. So naive realism is that naive idea that everything is somehow real that's outside of you. It's not, it's information that's being processed by your brain to make you perceive reality in a consistent and sensible way.
Yeah, a lot of this stuff, I mean, David and I are pagans, and a lot of this stuff I find personally, it complements a lot of that kind of, I suppose some people call it new agey sort of belief, that the like things like meditation and just generally of how you perceive, like with ritual and that kind of stuff. Have you found, the more you've gone deeper into this stuff, have you adopted a spirituality yourself? Are you a religious person, getting a slightly bit personal there? But...
No, I've never been religious. Religion is something that leaves me completely cold.
Right. Yeah.
And I tend not to be a believer of anything.
Yeah.
What I am is somebody trying to make sense of what is around us in as a consistent way as I possibly can. I don't have the belief gene.
Right.
This doesn't mean that I don't consider myself to be spiritual. It's how we define the word spiritual. Now, for instance, you can talk about ritual magic, and Aleister Crowley and various other things.
Yeah.
And all that magic is doing is trying to control the environment around us by using rituals or various other ways of getting your mind into a state where you can resonate with external reality and manipulate external reality. Now, this is science. This is not New Age. I mean, one of the biggest problems I have is when people turn around and place my books in the New Age section. Effectively, I spend most of my time when I'm writing my books is making sure that my reader has the references. Very, very few New Age books have an index, and very few have a bibliography. And the reason being because most New Age books are actually based upon waffle rubbish. It's subjective opinion, and it's not based upon anything. My books, every single comment I make is referenced. Every single quotation is referenced right back to the academic papers. I want my readers to actually say, is Anthony Peake talking a load of crap or not? There's only one way of finding out. Let's go to the papers and see if his source information is correct or not. Then they make up their own mind.
I think people like Alistair, if they were around today, I think they're more than likely to be fans of your work, not because it's New Age, but because it is science. That's how I see it.
Well, one of the groups that one of my biggest fans in terms of organizations is an organization called the Servants of the Light.
Yeah. Which
is the world's biggest, I think it's true, the world's biggest occult organization. And I've been invited twice to their ceremonies. And indeed, the lady who heads it up, a lady called Dolores Ashcroft Nowicki. If you go onto the Servants of the Light website, you will actually see that Dolores actually makes a statement on there saying that my first book, Is There Life After Death, is effectively required reading for members of the Servants of the Light. And the reason being is that what I'm doing is the science of what occult groups have known for centuries. And this is, again, a central point of my book, The Infinite Minefield. I touch on everything from theosophy to anthroposophy, to the Kabbalah, to various other belief systems. And if you actually start scratching these belief systems and start looking at actually, you get through the symbolism and start to realize what they're actually talking about. For instance, if you start reading things like the material from Manly Hall, The Secret of All Ages. Manly Hall was a very, very high-ranking Mason who wrote many books about Masonic symbolism and everything else. You start reading directly into that, you will find that there are certain themes that come up all the time. And the themes I write about, in fact, two specific ones: the role of the pineal gland in actually accessing alternate states of consciousness and alternate realities. And secondly, the duality of human consciousness, the idea that we are not one, but we are two beings embodied within our head, or effectively we are dual creatures. I call it the daemon and the eidolon. Other people will call it the higher self. Other people will call it angels or whatever they wish to call it. These are all manifestations of a known truth that has been known for millennia.
And your book, the Daemon, that word actually is a reference for demon, isn't it? Is it not?
It is effectively, like anything else, things are literally demonized.
Yeah.
In the sense that the word daemon was a tutelary spirit. Socrates had a daemon, for instance, and it comes from ancient belief systems that at the point of birth, every human being is given a daemon. And the daemon is the being that knows your whole life, knows what you're going to do in your life, the outcome of every decision you make in your life. And this daemon is the voice in the head that guides you. Joan of Arc heard her daemon. I've written a stage play about Joan of Arc and the relationship between Joan of Arc and her daemon. You have, as I say, Socrates had a daemon. Rudyard Kipling had a daemon, and these are terms they actually use. But this duality is known through most cultures throughout the world, from West African belief systems right through to the Huna in Hawaii and the Polynesians. Now, effectively, they all state the same thing, that we have a higher self. Now, I believe that and effectively most rituals that the occult people do and pagans do is literally to manifest within yourself that higher self, or to be able to open up communication channels with that higher self. Indeed, I've just got another book deal for a book I'll be writing next year, which will be processes by which we can actually open up communication channels with the higher self. Now, the higher self to me is analogous to a computer player in a computer game. Now, I'm old enough to remember, and even then I was old, was when Lara Croft and the Tomb Raider
I remember that one.
came out. Okay?
Yeah.
Now, imagine life is a computer game. Okay? Remember I was talking about the 0 point field and everything else? This is the program. It runs the program of life. The 0 point field contains everything that is, everything that has been, and everything that can be. Remember I said earlier on about the statistical wave, the probability wave that shrinks a wave into a subatomic particle, which makes up the reality around us. When things aren't observed, they can be statistically anywhere and they can be anything, but encoded within them is the possibility to be anything and to bring about any outcome. Again, if the listeners out there are going, oh, what total crap, he's talking crap again, I suggest they start reading the latest papers by Stephen Hawking. Yes, and I did say Stephen Hawking. I didn't say some guy down the pub. I said one of the world's leading authorities in quantum physics. Hawking himself is of the opinion, and he's written something called the top-down hypothesis of particle physics. And the top-down part of particle physics suggests that perception collapses everything into a point line. In other words, everything is out there is in potential, and by you doing certain actions, you create that reality rather than another reality which is still waiting to come into existence, which is already encoded. Okay. Now, interestingly enough, as an aside, there is a guy, an Israeli physicist, who's been doing work on the Schwarzschild radius and the areas around black holes. They have come to the conclusion that the whole universe is a huge hologram. Okay, and the holographic mess, the black holes themselves have holographic surfaces. It's a guy called Jacob Bekenstein. And again, if anybody doesn't believe me, just Google Bekenstein and Google his work. Okay, so going back again to the idea that all the realities there are encoded. So if all the realities are encoded, imagine that everything that can happen in your life is on a CD-ROM, a computer CD-ROM game. The game gets loaded. You get born. You're the Lara Croft sprite on the screen. You're suddenly born and you're standing there as Lara Croft does at the start of the game. She starts running down corridors and gets eaten by a monster. She's dead. However, you can go back and start the game again. And the first time she gets killed, she splits into two people. There's the game player, the daemon, and there's the Eidolon, which is on the screen, which doesn't remember the last life. So this time there's a game player watching the screen. And the game player knows that when Lara Croft went down that path, she got eaten by a monster. So the game player makes Lara not go into that room and go down another corridor. And this is effectively how you win the game, isn't it? What you do is, by playing the game many times, being killed many, many times, you pick up information, or the game player does. The sprite on the screen doesn't know it, the avatar doesn't, but the game player does. That's the daemon. Now, I argue that I have evidence, and in my first book, Is There Life After Death, I present the science of how it is that in the final moments of our life, we fall out of time and we live our life again within the recording, within the Akasha, within the 0 point field, within the computer game. And we live our lives as many times as it takes to go through the game. So the game player, the daemon, knows when you were killed last time round. This is why you have warnings in your head. This is why people, in my book, The Daemon, so many people wrote to me. So after The It Lad, the first book, lots of people wrote to me to say they had had experiences in their lives where a voice in their head had said to them, don't do this, had warned them and had saved their lives. This is the game player making the sprite on the screen do something different in order for it to survive until the next danger. And then it gets killed and it goes back and it's reborn again and it lives its life again. This is called the eternal recurrence, the eternal return. It's been known again since ancient Greek times. It is something that is known probably by the Masons. It's something known by secret societies. Peter Ouspensky wrote about it. Nietzsche wrote about it. This is again a far more rational explanation for phenomena like deja vu, precognition, and other weird events that happen in our lives. Deja vu is not evidence of reincarnation. People tell me and they say, oh, you know, deja vu, you have a deja vu sensation, you recognize something, you've been there before in a previous life. No, you haven't. If you'd been there as somebody else, say you have a deja vu sensation now. If you were remembering being somebody else, you would be wearing different clothes. You would be in a different time. It would feel different. When people have deja vus, they are embodied in their own body, perceiving the circumstances that they are perceiving out of their eyes, wearing their clothes in the location they are now in 2014. So therefore, a deja vu sensation is exactly what it feels like. It's the remembrance of something you have done before that's part of this life, that's part of your past. It's a remembrance of the past, not a perception of the future. Which, of course, if you play a computer game, sometimes if the sprite, the Lara Croft, could be sentient, the Lara Croft sprite might suddenly think, do you know, I've run down this corridor before.
Yeah,
I've done this before. And then it goes, and it goes from her mind. Just finally on this section then, I'd just like to make another final point. This idea of living your life again and not remembering the fact that you've lived the life before, as the Lara Croft sprite, what I call the Eidolon, does, again, goes right back to ancient Greek beliefs. It's amazing. Ancient Greeks used to believe that when you died, you had to cross the river Styx, and the ferryman would turn up to take you across the Styx. Now, this is my overall hypothesis, is called cheating the ferryman, because we cheat the ferryman. We never cross the river Styx. But in ancient Greek beliefs, you crossed the river Styx and you went to Hades, the land of the undead, the dead. But certain people could choose to go back and live their lives again. In order to do that, they had to drink the waters of the river Lethe, or the Lethe. In other words, the river Styx, according to great ancient Greek legend, had many, many tributaries, the Acheron, various other ones. And the Lethe is the river of forgetting. And what the legend said was that you would drink the waters of the Lethe and it would wipe all your memories clean of your previous life. And then you'd go back to being born again and live your life again, having totally forgotten that you've lived it before. The technical term for this is anamnesis. It's the loss of forgetting. And it's a known principle within the pre-Socratic belief systems and the Pythagoreans and people like this. These things have been known for centuries. So you live your life and you've forgotten your previous lives, but part of you your daemon remembers. Now, just very point in answer to your question about the daemon, the word.
Yeah.
Deamon is the ancient Greek term. When the Christians came around, they didn't like certain ancient belief systems, the ancient Greeks, their belief systems, and the Roman belief systems, because the Romans had a similar belief system where they called it your genius. Okay, so your genius and the daemon are the same thing. The Christians didn't like this. The Christians also didn't like the idea that you lived your life over and over again and the eternal recurrence. They didn't like that. However, there's one group of Christians, schismatic Christians, who took all this on board, and they were called the Gnostics. The Gnostics carried forward the concept of the daemon and the eidolon, the idea of the eternal return, the idea that this reality is an illusion, that it's some kind of creation. They said it was created by Yaldabaoth, the demiurge, in other words, this illusionary universe has been created by a god who who thinks he's God, but he isn't. The God of the Old Testament, the guy that used to murder people and do awful things. That's Yaldabaoth. The reason the Gnostics came up with this idea was that there is a concept in Christianity that's hugely difficult for Christian theologians to get over, and it's the reason why evil exists. In other words, if God was good, why does evil exist? It's called, I think it's theophany, something like that. The Gnostic solution was, the reason there's evil in this world is the God that we think is God is evil. He doesn't know he's evil, but he's created evil in the world, and there's a God behind God. And again, there's a friend of mine called Miguel Cano who has a podcast called The God Behind God, Aeon Byte, where we discuss these ideas there. So there's a God behind God. And this, I believe, is what you guys are interested in. The God behind God, the God that isn't the God of the Bible, but it's the God that is much more inside everything, that's inside us all.
Right,
okay?
Yeah.
Now, they wanted to do something about this, the Christians. So they literally took the word daemon and changed it to the word demon to make it negative.
Demonize it.
To literally demonize it, to play around with the words, to make it nasty. Because, of course, Christians believe that you live and you die, and when you die, you go to heaven, and then you get your eternal reward. In other words, time is linear. And effectively, people like St. Augustine and various others were very much along the lines of the linearity of time. But effectively, the Gnostics said time is not linear. Time is circular. It goes round and round. It's like the Ouroboros eating its own tail. Again, a very, very mystic symbol that you will know about. The symbol is seen within a lot of the Northern European belief systems, the worship of Odin and everything else. This has this circularity. So yeah. These are dealing with very, very deep truths.
Yeah. David, I'm sure you're dying to indulge yourself.
Well, excuse me, I've got a frog in my throat. The first thing that caught my attention was mention of a stage play, Joan of Arc. I hope, Anthony, you and I can discuss that at greater depth some other time.
No, absolutely. Absolutely,
that has already caught my attention. Fascinating. Oh, gosh, where do I begin? I think I need to contextualize my own take on all this. I'm a great respecter of your work, Anthony. We need many, many, many more people like you.
Thank you.
I think you're one of the best exemplars of somebody trying to explain very complex scientific truths to a largely resistant public, and I take my hat off to you for that.
Thank you.
Gosh, I mean, where do I begin? I live in Clapham, so I'm not sure there are many pooters around here anymore, or ordinary members of on the Clapham omnibus. I don't really see that. And as a self-confessed Clapham heathen, I wonder where that leaves me. I'm old school. I don't go for any of the cheap theatre of Richard Dawkins. I have huge trouble seeing this so-called battle between science and theology. I mean, even in Darwin's day, it wasn't that simple. I mean, Darwin's from a family of Unitarians. One of his uncles was a minister who used to teach the origin of species from the pulpit. So, I have great trouble with this either-or modern game that certain people are playing. I think you're one of the people trying to bridge that gap, strangely enough. And I think, more power to your elbow for that. What do you think? Let me put my cards on the table a little further. I think as someone that dips into academia from time to time, it's difficult enough getting students to read core texts than to actually think about anything advanced. Therefore, I suspect it's less of a cover-up and more a desperate timetable, making sure that only undergraduates and postgraduates are introduced to certain ideas. I mean, I'm assuming you don't think it's a conspiracy. Paul's the conspiracy guy. I'm really not. I'm assuming you think along the same lines I do, because I noticed when I researched you, you actually went to Warwick University and the London School of Economics.
Yep.
So, I think we're both aware that timetables are out of control as it is. So you don't see a conspiracy, I assume, simply complex information which is difficult to deliver in a short space of time.
Totally agree with you. I am not a conspiracy theorist, far from it.
Yeah.
I think that what is happening is that, as you say, the difficulty is that if you're, my wife did A-level physics, and one of the things you can't do if you're teaching physics for people who are going to become engineers, people who are going to be building bridges, building spaceships, doing all the kind of things that Newtonian physics works exceptionally well with. You cannot start confusing them by turning around and saying light is a particle when it's viewed, and it's a wave when it's not.
Yeah.
Because that will just confuse totally. And I know my wife even now cannot accept a lot of the things I tell her. In fact, funnily enough, I just had my 60th birthday. And
congratulations.
Thank you. It was over the weekend. And my wife has actually bought me a book on quantum mechanics, the maths of quantum mechanics. And she's hoping, because she's done maths and further maths, she's going to help me with some of the more esoteric maths that they use. Because what it's saying is that, you're taught a whole lot of things for O-level. O-level shows my age, doesn't it? But GCSEs and then A-level, you're taught a whole worldview. Yeah. And then even at undergraduate level, you're taught a whole worldview, a mechanistic worldview, a deterministic worldview of science. That works. To then start throwing in the metaphysics that are thrown up absolutely as soon as you start getting into quantum mechanics, you're going to have a problem. And as you quite rightly say, I mean, Richard Dawkins, I am a huge fan of Richard Dawkins. Yeah. A lot of what he says about religion and organized religion, I'm right there with him. Yeah. Totally 100%. I have no problem with evolution or anything else. Yeah. As we say with Thomas Huxley and with Darwin, and the way the Unitarians believe things, as you rightly say, Darwin was a man of his time, but he wasn't an atheist in that kind of terminology. Yeah. Now, the problem is that Richard Dawkins is dipping his toes into areas that he doesn't necessarily fully understand or appreciate. Now, one of the major critics of me and my work is that people turn around and say, Anthony Peake is a social scientist, he's a sociologist, therefore what qualifies him to talk about particle physics and neurology? My counter-argument is, what does a botanist know about quantum physics in the same argument? Because Richard Dawkins is a botanist, and people forget this, that because he's a scientist, he somehow knows lots of things. People then cite James Randi, the guy. James Randi has no qualifications in anything. He has no qualifications. He was a conjurer and an illusionist who left school at 15 to join a traveling circus. Yeah. Yet people will take his word against people like myself, who I've spent the last 35 years of my life reading virtually every book I can get hold of in terms of science, neurology, quantum physics. I know what I'm talking about. But what I don't believe is there's a conspiracy. It's just a matter of it doesn't make sense. Richard Feynman, the greatest physicist of the late 20th century, his famous quotation, what was it? Don't try to understand particle physics or try to rationalize about it, because if you do, you'll go down a hole that you'll never get out of. This is the way the universe works. Just because it doesn't work the way we want it to work doesn't mean that it doesn't work that way, because it does.
I think you're a very fine man, Anthony. I'm looking forward to buying you a belated birthday beer at some point.
Oh, that'll be good.
Let me throw something else at you. And again, excuse the frog in my throat. Um, I don't know what you think of psychoanalysis, psychosynthesis. I mean, I'm interested in those ideas. I tend to see modern paganism having natural roots in those particular fields. I mean, Freud, if we look at his idea of the id, the sort of the subconscious, the basement of the building, that makes sense to me. And there was a student of his, a colleague of his, Roberto Assagioli, who said, well, if there's a basement, there's an attic. And there's no other way of explaining Mozart writing a symphony when he was 6, blah, blah, blah.
Spot on.
Therefore, there is an inbuilt higher consciousness that people need to tap and explore. I took great pleasure listening to what you were saying a minute ago. You have a very original take on those ideas. At the risk of giving something away, because art is obviously a way of, tapping into those resources, what are you going to say about reaching the higher mind? I mean, would you care to share that with us now? Or is it sort of a top secret extract in your book?
No, far from it. I mean, what people for years have been saying to me, we really need a kind of a self-help book to get in contact with the daemon. Now, I've always been rather worried about taking that approach because effectively it suggests that I know more than my readers, in the sense that I have access to esoteric knowledge of how the higher self can be accessed. And I never try to put myself on any form of pedestal. All I am is I'm exactly the same as my readers. I just, have been fortunate enough to have a series of publishers wanting to buy my works and my books, because I've never had to self-publish or anything. Publishers want to take my books, which is wonderful. And I don't see myself as a guru. But what I do feel is that there are certain processes within the brain that seem to suggest that we can, under certain circumstances, access the thought patterns or communicate with the higher self or the daemon. And one of the processes, for instance, I've been in touch recently with an American psychiatrist who has been working on hypnotizing his patients while they are wearing a pair of workers' goggles, protection goggles that people wear. And he blacks out the periphery field of each eye. And in doing so, he effectively puts to sleep the dominant hemisphere of the brain.
Fascinating.
Now, in doing so, it means he's able to access the underlying consciousness that exists within us. I'm very much a huge fan, and I'm sure you are, of Julian Jaynes and his book on the bicameral mind.
Yeah.
Now, of course, it is very much in keeping with Julian Jaynes's ideas. And by blacking out that part of the mind, you can then start accessing the subliminal self, as Myers called it. I also believe that there are other techniques. You can go into very, very deep hypnosis. And I know that Erickson and various other serious hypnotists used to hypnotize people to a very, very deep level. And when they did get to that deep level, another consciousness would manifest. And that consciousness had very, very different ideas. I'm also interested in expanding a lot more on my books where I write about the split brain operations of people like Roger Sperry and Michael Gazzaniga, because I believe there's a lot of evidence there to suggest that if the corpus callosum is cut and the communication channels between the dominant and non-dominant hemisphere are effectively destroyed, two personalities manifest. Now, again, the major problem with communicating with the non-dominant hemisphere is that for most people it is non-verbal, because it's either Broca's area or Wernicke's area in the brain is where verbal ideas come forward. So the communications may be difficult. But I am in this wonderful position of I'm about to start a new, because I work as a management consultant. Is how I earn my living. And I have been working on and off for a local epilepsy charity here in the Sussex area. And I'm now about to start on a contract with them for a year. And while I'm working for them, they have one of the best libraries in the world on temporal lobe epilepsy, migraine, autism, various of the factors that I think are areas where the daemon manifests itself under given circumstances.
Right.
For instance, I believe that people who experience temporal lobe epilepsy under certain circumstances access the thought patterns and the perceptions of the daemon. I believe people like myself who are classical migraineurs, when they have a migraine aura, start to perceive the reality behind the reality, the holographic nature of reality. Right. Now, there might be past classic migraineurs out there who will appreciate what I'm saying here. When I have a migraine aura before I have a headache, if indeed I have the headache, because these days I don't even do that, you get something called a scotoma. And a scotoma is where the visual field starts to break down and you start seeing jagged edges. Now, Hildegard of Bingen, who was a very famous mystic lady and poet and painter in medieval times, if you look at some of her paintings, she was painting her migraine aura. And during her migraine aura, she had mystic experiences. So I believe that the channels of communication, the mystic experiences, are opened up during this time. And I'm intending on using my time with the epilepsy charity to pursue with the real heavy researchers on temporal lobe epilepsy as to what is happening here. What are the neurological constructs that are taking place? I believe, and I think I have very strong evidence for this, that it is facilitated by two neurotransmitters. There's the neurotransmitter glutamate, which is the major neurotransmitter of the mammalian brain. Now, as you know, a neurotransmitter is a endogenous, internally generated chemical that facilitates communication between the neurons across the synaptic cleft or the synaptic gap. And certain chemicals are sent across and it activates or deactivates certain actions within the brain. This is how messages get across the brain. Glutamate is the major neurotransmitter of the brain, and it's particularly active during temporal lobe seizures. It's active during migraine seizures. It's very active during schizophrenia. It's active during autism. And this is the big point. It's also active during the near-death experience. So clearly you have a linkage here with a lot of altered states of consciousness. But on top of that, my book, The Labyrinth of Time, I focus in on something even more exciting, and this is mind-blowing stuff, literally mind-blowing. I have evidence that the pineal gland generates, endogenously, internally generates dimethyltryptamine, DMT. Now, DMT, as you know, is the most powerful hallucinogenic drug known to man. It's the basis of ayahuasca, and it's found in everywhere. It is everywhere. All organic material and organic creatures have DMT in them. We have DMT in our body. It's been found in the lining of the stomach. It's been found in the bloodstream. It's been found in spinocerebral fluid. Recently, it was, and this is the big thing, because Rick Strassman, who wrote the book DMT, The Spirit Molecule, has been criticized because people say there's no evidence that DMT is in the brain because it can't cross the blood-brain barrier. There was an series of experiments done by somebody called Jimo Boragin at the University of Michigan. Again, check this out. Don't take my word for it. Jimo Boragin. She is a lady Japanese researcher at the University of Michigan. She's been doing research with rats and rats' brains. They discovered two things last September, October. One of them, which is the first thing, which is intriguing, was that they actually killed rats and they continued measuring brain activity. And around about 10 seconds after the rat was dead, there was a huge spike of brain activity. The brain came alive and was firing everywhere. That's the near-death experience. Okay, that's the first one. So they found neurological evidence for brain activity after you are dead. The reason they use the rat's brains is they're very, very similar to human brains in their structures. But the more important thing was when they were working with live rats at this period of time when the rats were dying, they managed to test the brains and doing chemical analysis of the brain. And lo and behold, within the pineal gland of the rats, they found dimethyltryptamine. which means that dimethyltryptamine is created by the brain, which means dimethyltryptamine is what has been long suggested a neurotransmitter. In other words, we have evolved this substance in our brain. Dimethyltryptamine, they now have explained one of the great mysteries of certain sections of the neurons of the brain. There are things called TARS receptors, trace amine associated receptors. These are little receptor sites in the neurons that work with amines and tryptamines, which means they work with dimethyltryptamine, which means that we now know that dimethyltryptamine is part of whatever our evolutionary plan is. On top of this, and this is even more amazing, and I mention this in my book, is that ayahuasca, as you probably know, is made up of two plants that are found in the Amazon basin, Banisteriopsis caapi and Psychotria viridas. One is a vine, the Banisteriopsis, the caapi is a vine, and the Psychotria viridas is a leaf. They mix these two together. The shamans mix these two together and boil them into a drink, a repulsive drink, which then becomes ayahuasca. Because the viridas contains, and it's one of the two, I never remember which one, contains dimethyltryptamine. The Banisteriopsis caapi contains something which is known as an MAO inhibitor, a monooxidase amine inhibitor. Okay? Now, this is weird, because if you just took Banisteriopsis caapi or the Psychotria viridas, whichever the one is that contains the DMT, and you drank it, nothing would happen. However much you drank, nothing would happen. And there's a reason for this. When it goes into the stomach secretes a hormone, the MAO, the monoamine oxidase. This actually stops the DMT crossing the lining of the stomach into the bloodstream. It stops it happening. However, the other plant, whichever one of the two it is, contains an MAO inhibitor, which actually stops the drug, the MAO being effective, which facilitates the ayahuasca and the DMT going straight into the bloodstream, which brings about the altered states of consciousness. The actual shamans were asked how, of the known at least 50,000 plants in the Amazon basin, how they knew to mix in the right ways these two plants. You know what they said? They said when they used to go shamanic traveling and they would go themselves into altered states of consciousness, they met the snakes. And the snakes told them and said, go and find this plant and go and find another plant. Bring them together and brew them, and you will be able to access our world, and ordinary people will be able to access our world. In other words, the plants told the shamans to create the brew that's ayahuasca. Now, inside the brain, we know now that DMT is produced, but there's another substance that's produced in the brain called harmaline. Harmaline is an MAO inhibitor. So we create in our brain an absolute equivalent of ayahuasca. Now, this is mind-blowing stuff. This is stuff that should be headlines around the world. Why on earth my book, The Infinite Minefield, wasn't headlines in papers around the world, I have no idea. Because it's the only book that mentions this material. Now, what is even weirder now, and again, there'll be mystics out there that this will resonate with so many people. There is something called the nectar of transcendence. When people go into altered states of consciousness, when they go into very, very deep meditation, people claim at the back of the throat they have this taste. It's an acidic taste, and it drips down the back of the throat. There is a technique called Kakura Mudra, which is done by the Indians and the shamans. And what you do is, when you're in this state, you put your tongue right back to the back of your throat, and you taste and you flick the nectar of divine inspiration. You drink it. It's the DMT dripping down. Now, how do I know that? Okay. At the 49th day of gestation, the embryo in the womb, as it develops, it has the pineal gland and the pituitary gland are placed at the back of the throat. That's where they are at the 49th day of gestation. It is at that point that the pituitary pineal body starts to move up the back of the skull into the center of the brain where it's located. So over a period of months, this is what it does. But it leaves a very tiny duct. I believe that when the pineal gland releases dimethyltryptamine, this tiny duct, for some people, is open. And the duct is the stuff that they taste is the dimethyltryptamine at the back of the throat, which brings about this nectar of transcendence. This is powerful, powerful explanatory stuff.
Yeah.
Oh my! Paul is eager. I can sense it, desperate to jump on you again. I need one more question, Paul. Do forgive me.
You go for it, mate. You go for it.
You know, I mean, we must have Anthony back. I mean, he's a wealth of information, isn't he? I mean, you know, wonderful to speak to.
Yeah, fantastic.
I noticed light comes up a lot in your work, Anthony, and I assume that most of the time you mean the flow of photons.
Correct.
Do you think, I mean, you know, there are certain Hindu groups that talk about light and sound as the key to transcendence. I'm assuming from what I've read of them, they actually are using these as metaphors for some sort of deep subjective experience. Do you think there is an inner mystical light?
Yes.
Or do you think actually it's, you know, they're the same thing misinterpreted? Or, you know, what's your take on that?
It's not a metaphor. Far from it. Again, in the book, The Labyrinth of Time, and you must read it now, you must.
Yeah.
I have a whole section on light and the inner light. And I believe the inner light is light that is drawn up by the 0 point field gives off photons. The 0 point field gives off electromagnetic energy. The electromagnetic energy is then given off within the 0 point field. And it then, within the brain itself, within the sections of the 0 point field within the brain, things called tiny structures called microtubules. And I don't know if you've come across the work of the ROR hypothesis
of
Penrose and Hamerhoff. Yeah. Now, I've taken Penrose and Hamerhoff far further than they've taken it. Again, you can feel my frustration here in that I'm taking so many areas and developing them, and the world is going, who's Anthony Peake? You know, and there are people like Dr. Lanza, who's written a book that they're actually putting him forward at the moment. People wanting him to win the Nobel Prize because he's actually linking quantum physics with consciousness. I did that in 2006, you know, in my first book. But this guy is, you know, they think he's the bee's knees and everything else. But that's my bugbear. But anyway, the going back, so the OR hypothesis. The biophoton, it's then converted into biophotons. Now, biophotons are actually light that are given off by cells. Again, this is not bullshit. There is an associate of mine called István Bokken, who is a Hungarian professor. And Bokken has been working on biophotons. He's written a series of fantastic papers on the subject. I'm regularly in contact with István now. And he, in his experiments, has recently shown that the eyes give off photons. Photons come out of the eyes into the outside world. So suddenly we have that old Descartes drawing, if you remember it, showing that how vision worked, that somehow we sent things out to the world and perceived it and brought it back in again. We know that photons are given off that way. We also know, and this is where it starts getting weirder because it links in with this snakes business.
Yeah.
We know that DNA gives off light. It's photoelectric. In fact, it's piezoelectric. Because we also know that the pineal gland calcifies. And there's little tiny crystals inside the pineal gland. These are piezoelectric. They're their own little generators of light. Okay? What is this light? I think this light is the inner light that we see when we close our eyes, when we travel in hyperspace, when we go lucid dreaming. What illuminates the dreams when you're lucid dreaming? Because there's a light source. That light source is the biophotons that are coming up, and it's being processed by the pineal gland. The pineal gland, of course, is the third eye. We also know that the pineal gland is light sensitive. For instance, there's something called a tutora, which is a lizard that's found off in a set of islands off New Zealand. Its third eye sits outside of its skull, and it's light sensitive. We know that there are ossified rods and cones within the pineal gland. It's processing light. So the inner light, so when you go to the Vedas, when you go particularly to the Zohar and the Torah and the Kabbalistic belief systems, the Or Ein Sof, the way in which light was created, it was the first thing, it was the sacred light, it was the source of everything. This is the inner light that mystics have talked about for centuries. And I believe I can do the science of how the inner light is processed by the brain, and it actually gives us enlightenment.
Absolutely wonderful. I'm going to treat myself to an Easter gift of that particular volume, and I'll be in touch, because that's got me very excited indeed.
Wow, thank you. I'm sure you'll find it amazing.
Oh, I'm enjoying this so much, Anthony. I mean, I could go on for hours, but time presses. And Mr. Obertelli wants to ask a question. I can feel it in my water.
Well, I've been making my notes. One of the things that came into my mind when you were talking about the photons and the light is the paranormal stories you hear of ghosts and that kind of thing. I mean, it kind of maybe explains how a lot of that happens in a scientific way. As in, if you are decoding light into your eyes and it's pretty much like computer code, then it's not so far-fetched that maybe something from a different area of light interrupts that code. You know, what are your views on that, on things like ghosts and paranormal stories?
Well, I'm very much a believer in the stone theory of hauntings. You know, the idea that something is somehow encoded within the stones. When there's, I mean, again, you know, Wilhelm Reich many years ago had this concept of orgone energy, and the idea of energy that's given off by living beings. Now, it's energy, electromagnetic energy. The energy is given off during times of stress or trauma. You know, you walk into a room when you were a kid and your parents have been arguing, you could sense it. This is because we have a certain degree of sensitivities. Now, if this energy form, we know that energy it just gets transferred. It never gets destroyed, it just gets transferred into another form of energy. So it could go into the stones and then come out of the stones again when the atmospheric conditions are correct. Now, this can manifest, if it's energy, it can manifest itself in the various forms of energy, including electromagnetic energy and including light. Now, if it is the fact that we have lost our ability, or certain people have lost their ability to actually perceive that light or perceive the wavelength of that light in some way, that under certain circumstances we can sense this, this would explain the hauntings. Yeah. It would explain, I mean, I work a great deal with mediums. I mean, I've done 2 sessions with science and mediumship at the Arthur Findlay College in Essex, where I've spent a weekend testing and discussing mediumship with mediums as to exactly what that is. And in fact, my next book, which will be out in October, is a book called The Immortal Mind. It's been written by myself and Professor Irvin Laszlo. And Laszlo and myself have written a book on what is the evidence that consciousness exists outside of the brain. And I spent 6 months researching mediumship, researching the history of this, of the phenomenon of mediumship, of ghosts, of reincarnation, all these areas to see whether consciousness can survive in some form or other. I'm still unsure. I think there's powerful evidence that we can perceive information, but I think the answer lies in the fact that time itself is an illusion. So therefore, somebody hasn't died because they died in your timeline, but in their own timeline, they may not have died because they exist in a different time. You know, I've written a book on Philip K. Dick recently as well, and, you know, the idea of his concept of orthogonal time. So I think that there is a lot of validity in this. And again, I think that as an explanator of these things, my developing hypothesis, no, my developing speculation It's not an hypothesis, and it's definitely not a theory. It's very important we get our terminology right on this. My speculation, I think, could be an explanator for a lot of these experiences.
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's fascinating stuff, isn't it?
Oh, totally.
David, so are you all out of bullets?
Well, I'm never out of bullets. I don't want to take too much more of Anthony's time. As I say, I could talk to him for untold hours, and indeed intend to at some point.
Well, effectively, David, if you're in Clapham, Clam, you're then a Sony, aren't you? Do you remember that term?
Yeah.
So Sony just across the bridge from Chelsea. Yeah. My an a girlfriend of mine many years ago actually lived in Lavender Hill. And I used to live in Streatham, so I know the area quite well. But that's a million years ago. But nevertheless,
for supper, or we just meet for a glass of wine or something.
Well, what I'm suggesting is that I have something called the Walker Group, and again, if you guys are linked up with me on Facebook, if you're not, please do.
Yeah, I've got you on my friends, so.
Okay, maybe David can join in. I'm trying to set up a Walker Group, which is a group of readers of mine that get together and discuss things. We had a very active one in Liverpool, and I keep trying to set one up in Crawley, because it's convenient. You can get from Clapham to Crawley, and there's a pub just across the road where we could have a few beers once a month, 5 or 6 of us, maybe more, and just discuss the ideas that are thrown up by my work, because I gain so much from my readers. My readers give me the information I need. It's not part of me anymore. It's not Anthony Peake's ideas. It's everybody's ideas. I just happen to be the fortunate guy that writes about it. And I'm very approachable, and I'm very keen to interface with my readers in any way I possibly can. So please link up with me on Facebook. Just seek up Anthony Peake. Also, David, both of you actually, because Paul, you're in Sutton, aren't you, I think?
Yeah, just right near Sutton, yeah.
Okay, is that I'm a member of something called the Scientific and Medical Network. And we have a meeting taking place in May in Guildford.
Oh, okay.
And we've got a friend of mine called Gary Lackman, who's speaking.
Oh, okay, right.
Now, this is the first time I've been involved in this particular group, but Gary Lackman used to be the original guitarist of Blondie.
Oh, right.
Okay. He wrote the song "I'm Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear."
Yeah.
Okay. By the way, that song was about telepathy.
Oh, was it?
Gary's told me this. We had a few beers over this, and he explained to me that what the song is about is when he was on tour and he had 1 or 2, let's say, relationships with girls other than his girlfriend. When his girlfriend used to phone him up, she used to say, "I saw you with that girl last night," and she used to describe what the girl looked like. And that's why he wrote "I'm Always Touched by Your Presence, Dear," because he felt she was watching him all the time. Gary is a fantastic person. He's got amazing knowledge of occultism and everything else. And Gary's going to be talking at this event. Again, I'll email you guys. It'll be on my Facebook wall. But we're going to try and get some of my readers together for that as well.
Sounds interesting, yeah.
Sounds me in for that, certainly, Anthony. We must hook up soon. Anthony, thank you so much for this incredibly enlightening discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you for asking the right questions and allowing me to go on and on, because I get in a flow.
Basically, well, our listeners no doubt are going to be looking forward to The Immortal Mind coming out in October. And have you got a website, a blog that they can check out also?
Yeah, if you go on to my books can be acquired in bookshops and on Amazon and everything else. But if you can really help me, if you buy the books off my website, because you can get signed copies there, I only charge over and above the book price just for postage and packing.
Right.
But if anybody's interested, the books are there as well. But effectively, my website is anthonypeake.com. That's Anthony with an H and Peake, and anthonypeake.com. I'm also on Facebook. Just look up Anthony Peake, because I'm the major Anthony Peake on there for some reason. You'll find me there. I also have an active web forum where my readers discuss ideas, kind of things we've been talking about today, and that is called cheatingtheferryman.com. That's right. cheatingtheferryman.com. Also, I have a YouTube site. Just go onto YouTube and just search out Anthony Peake. There's lots of interviews on there. There's videos. There's TV interviews, various other things on there. There's a lot of material, and I'm always putting up new stuff on there as well.
Excellent. Excellent
okay.
stuff. Well, we, again, really appreciate you coming on, and hopefully maybe get you back when the new book comes out and we can have another in-depth conversation about it.
Oh, thanks, guys. And if you can let me know when this is up, I can put it on all my web places as well.
Excellent. That's great.
Okay.
All right then. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.
Okay, that's a wrap. What do you think, David?
Well, wasn't that absolutely fascinating? What an interesting guy.
Yeah. I'm probably sounded a bit biased because I'm a big fan of him, but I urge our listeners to read his stuff and go and do a bit of research, and you'll find it's all based on some pretty solid stuff.
Well, I mean, that's what this podcast is all about. I mean, I'm trying desperately at the moment to remember who in Darwin's family was a Unitarian. They all believed in open minds, and he believed in God.
Yeah.
Was it? There was someone called. Anyway, I'm going to have to get back to everyone on that. Think for yourselves. That's the point.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Next week's guest is going to be Matthew Williams. Matthew Williams is an ex-crop circle maker. He currently hosts a show called Circle Makers TV, an online TV kind podcast. I'm not sure, what do you call a TV podcast? Is it a video cast? But it goes live and you can log on and check that out and speak to him via that. And we're going to have a good old chat about crop circles, whether aliens make them, whether people make them, and whether there's anything more to them. What do you think of that, David?
I hope I'm not getting too much of a reputation for being an old Mr. Skeptic. I confess I am. Why? Because there are real mysteries and glories in this universe, and we've got to work out what they are and when we're not being tricked.
Well, yeah, that's true. I've got my own views about the crop circles, and Matthew's certainly got his. But we'll save that for next week, I think.
I think so, because that's one of those areas that starts a row, as I'm aware. So I'm looking forward to that.
Cool. No, well, I think you'll probably see eye to eye with Matthew, I think.
Interesting.
He's an interesting fellow. Okay, well, again, listeners, please link the show. Tell your friends about it. And
link it or else.
Yeah.
You've been told once, this is the second time, be careful.
Yeah.
Link it.
I wouldn't mess with David, you know what he can be like.
People don't like me when I'm angry, Mr. McGee.
Okay, folks, until next time, see you later, sausages.